Good morning, everyone. It is January 13th, 2014, and the Commissioners Court is now open. And instead of us having the outward prayer, I think we'll all stand and say our prayer to ourselves, and then we'll do the pledge after that. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll go to item number 1, approval of minutes. And we will just get this preliminary stuff out of the way, then we'll go there. Do we have any corrections?
I have a suggested correction on the minutes. Item 7, Santa Fe Railroad Museum, discussion was held, no action taken. If the minutes would reflect that an audit was requested at that meeting. And then item 8, the county transportation grant program. Look at my notes here. That the recommendation was made to Commissioners Court by Dave Kemp, just indicating that we were ineligible for funds.
Those and any others? Okay, now that Commissioner Vaughn won't be here today, he's got to start voting, what I understand, so.
I make a motion that we accept the minutes with the suggested changes.
Okay. Second. All in favor? 4-0. We're going to jump to item number 7 at this time. And Mr. Larry Ersick is here to fill us in and what's going on. Starts it.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Great to see you guys.
Good to be seen at our age, my age.
I'm here with Jeff Crowley. I don't remember him. We're here to represent the justice system analysis we performed recently for Potter County. As you recall, the goal was to kind of determine the alternative operation and procedures that can be undertaken to reduce the number of jail beds and square footages in the supporting facilities in the future. We reviewed operational procedures for the county jail facilities, court facilities, and other related departments. And one of the first things we did is we gathered data. We got things from the sheriff, other county officials, and then did some research and gathered our own data. Then we pulled everybody in for interviews. We interviewed the judicial and prosecutorial officials, law enforcement, and mental health. So the analysis included quite a number of things. We reviewed the types of inmates that we currently have in the jail. We evaluated the process of moving inmates through the system right now, the way it currently exists. We reviewed the use of pretrial services to obtain arrestee risk assessment information for bond setting, and quantified the use of probation and alternative monitoring programs, those that exist now and those that we may want to consider in the future. We reviewed the speed of pre-sentencing investigations, studied the pretrial alternatives to incarceration, and reviewed the sentence alternatives to incarceration. And one of the goals here was gather all this information, see what recommendations we can make to improve the system, but also see if we could get a better idea of the jail capacity needs and projections that you need in the future. I have to say we had some incredible guidance by the executive committee, the court appointed, most of who are here today, that helped us out. I really appreciate their guidance and leadership. We also got a lot of assistance, and I appreciate district court judges, district attorney's office, county attorney's office, sheriff's office, adult probation, and the district clerk's office. All of who participated. We sent out these surveys, very exhaustive. They all filled out, and they attended interviews. And we really appreciate their time, and it was that information that provided us in doing this analysis. So now I'm going to Jeff to go ahead and proceed on with some of the findings.
And again, also I'd like to convey thank you for the opportunity to go through this exercise. Actually, to me, it's kind of fun. You'll find some of these there's kind of a little mix of what the results are, but some of them will be used a summary of facts. Some will be some conclusions that we actually make, and then some, with some areas and instances, we'll make recommendations. But really, in some places, we just actually point some things out. And the things that we necessarily may not be able to make recommendations on, but it's up to the county whether or not they want to take action on themselves. Again, we just point it out. The first one that was really prevalent, that came from all the departments, and we heard throughout, was the issue of delay in moving cases through the system due to the backlog of the Department of Public Safety's crime lab. And that was consistent throughout. It's fairly common around the country. It's common in some parts of Texas. Some entities have their own crime labs, so they're able to come in, like say, control their own destiny. Some crime labs are regional. So the amount of delay that can be built into the system as a result of the delay of the crime lab getting evidence back to move cases along is really substantial. And their problem ends up becoming the county's problem. It costs you a lot of money. And that's something that you may want to take a look at. And you can talk further on, and we can talk further on as well. But those delays really are substantial. Now, they do prioritize, and there are other alternatives. Some of them can be a little bit more costly, but it's something that should be explored. Something else that's pretty interesting, we found out that there's 3 throughout the justice system that holds the, what we call inmate information. There's actually 3 different software systems, and one's for the sheriff's department, another one for the county's attorney's office, and the other one that the judges have. And none of these software systems communicate with one another. We find out there's multiple people doing multiple data entry quite often on the same information. And it's, I wouldn't call it a log jam, but it's redundant input for items for each department. It can cause delay in information and information transfer. And it also increases the potential for error. We get into a little more detail here, and you can read on about that. But it's something that I want to take a look at. Pretrial release opportunities. This is where the people who are in jail aren't, there's a large percentage of them who aren't convicted. In fact, that's what really initiated this study, was to look at that level and balance percentage of people who are in jail that aren't convicted. And then what we did is we looked at what sort of release opportunities that could be undertaken that may be used in other systems throughout the state or even throughout the country. These types release opportunities would only be for what we call low-risk type inmates. One of the things that's there's availability, it's available to the county, is to look at the GPS monitoring, whether it's an ankle bracelet or a wrist bracelet or different type. The expense of that's relatively low, $2 a day versus housing in your jail at $54 a day. This takes an entire review and agreement from different agencies to see who would qualify or who you would want to utilize in this program. But it is something that could ultimately save the county a substantial amount of funds as well. Another thing that we talked about amongst the different groups was the bond out process. This was really a pretty interesting discussion because there are two differences of opinion regarding the process. We talk about this not so much as just the process, but it's the bond out rates. And it's the rates that people are charged that they need to post as far as bail to be released. There were, in the groups that we interviewed, there were 2 different schools of thought. Some thought the rates were sufficient. Some thought the rates were too high. And the people who think the rates are too high, the correlation with that is if it makes it more difficult for people to post bond and get out, then that keeps them in jail longer and also drives up your population and your operational costs as well. That's something I would suggest that the county look at as you review your bond rates to see if the current rates should be revised or not. And a lot of that data and information you can get through the state, and they can provide pretty good analysis of what results compared to what other counties do. Another feature that's pretty common amongst county jails throughout the country is what we call work release. Something that they used to do quite often. They tend not to do it that much anymore, and I really understand as to why. To have an effective work release program, you need to have the facility designed in order to initiate and institute an effective work release program. The actual design and layout of this jail is really not conducive to running an efficient work release program. It's just inherently with the design that you currently have. The housing isn't separate. Most commonly when we design facilities, the actual housing for the work release people is separate from the jail. One of the reasons why is it eliminates, if these people are going to be leaving the secured facility, leaving the day to go work, and they come back in, it's very easy for them to bring contraband back into the facility. And that's a high risk event that they have to deal with. So we don't necessarily make a recommendation here, but we're just pointing out something that's inefficient within the existing system that does put more challenges on your system. Some large counties throughout the state is very common to find what we call a court administrator. And what we found here is the judges within Potter County do not work just within Potter County. They also work in other surrounding counties, and it can make it very challenging for scheduling and handling the dockets that they have to handle. They have a pretty substantial caseload throughout the entire system, all the judges do. And sometimes what we found is that sometimes it's pretty much given that some form of a court administrator can actually improve the efficiency of court docket schedules. One of the other things that drives up the number of pretrial inmates in Potter County, just the demographics itself within the county. We've observed that there's a higher level of pretrial felons due to some of the following factors that pretty much are really out of anyone's control. And we list those here. You have the bus depot in Potter County, the train yard, the train tracks in Potter County attract a lot of transients. You end up picking up a lot of people there that end up being incarcerated. The homeless shelters for the city are actually in Potter County. The assistance programs for the city largely exist in just Potter County. And some of the aging part of them are also in Potter County as well. Again, these influence the number of arrests and levels in Potter County. And some of the information that's given back to us by the Sheriff's Department is that we find that there's a large number of repeat offenders from these particular areas where they pick people up. When you bring in repeat offenders, so just due to the fact they are repeat offenders, there's less chance of them being given probation, work release, or working on some sort of low-risk program where they can go ahead and be re-released because of the frequency of which they come back. What that does is actually ends up driving up your overall levels. That's one of the reasons why there's an inordinate amount sometimes of pretrial felons within your system. The other thing too, a lot of those people they pick up, especially the transients, are very high risk for the county to manage. When you have somebody that they've never met before, that they pick up at the train yard, they come in and they may have some sort of mental health or severe deficiency, that's considered a very high risk because they don't know what sort of behavior or action they either have or could have. So they have to classify them higher, and what that does is it puts them into a more of a maximum, medium, maximum security type level. And that also can keep your rates a little bit higher. Another thing that we found that influences the level in number of inmates throughout your facility, and this is really common throughout the entire country. There's several other major large cities we've had a lot of discussion with about this, is that the Amarillo Police Department staffing ratios and their budget influence the number of people entering the county jail system, and also how long those detainees will stay in the jail. Where that's really relevant is if one of the things that we heard were that detectives are the ones who really move cases along, the police detectives. And the number of police detectives within Potter County, as the population has grown, the number of detectives have not. And so there's a disproportionate amount there as far as the ability to move cases along. You're the ones holding them, you're the ones absorbing the cost, but the city may not have increased their level of support the health populations. Again, when I talk about budgets, and bring that up, how the budget can have a direct influence. if the city has to tighten their purse strings and they limit the number of people out there on patrol, it also minimizes the amount of people they can bring in and arrest. Therefore, that affects the numbers as well too. So it's pretty interesting how much the city's police department can actually affect the overall level of inmates we have throughout. A surprising statistic here in Potter County, the amount of females being incarcerated throughout the country have gone up substantially within the last 10 years. It used to cover somewhere around 7 to 8% throughout the country. Then it got up around 12, then it pushed 15. And in some areas now it's pushing as high as 20. In Potter County, at the time when we were doing this study, it was upwards of 27% of your jail population was female. So what does that mean when we start putting some things, numbers and graphs and tables as far as what we have? What we did here is that this is the county population growth. And you see that graph? You've had substantial growth in 2000. 2010 at 6.6, and working with other officials, the projected growth is 7%. So we look at those numbers as far as we're going to do projections and designing a facility. Then we go ahead and do projection of the jail population count and do that correlation as well. We point out where you are now, what levels you're at now, and what you average, and the average, what we call the average daily population, ADP. If you look at that on here, you see what the projection is, and then we cascade that out a little bit further, all the way up to 2030, because when you're going to design a facility, of course you wanted to design it to today's numbers, you needed to design it for the future. Excuse me. Yeah, this particular slide here, I like this one I mentioned earlier about the average daily population. What we put in here is what your jail population is, and then there's a correlation as what's called needed beds. And what a lot of people may not be familiar with is the jail is actually considered full capacity when it starts at 85%. You hear different people around the country say different things. Some will say as low as 80, some will say 90, but it's pretty consistent around the country. You'll hear a figure right about 85%. The reason why the jail facility is actually full at 85% is when somebody comes in, if you were at 100% capacity, or even 95%, and they have a busy Friday night and they bring people in, in some cases, they can't put them where they're supposed to go. In other words, there could be multiple gang members, they all have to be separated. All your women's facilities could be full, then where do you put them? There's people who could be involved in different crimes, they need to be in separate housing units, you can't put them in the same. And they start having management problems and classification problems and placement throughout jails when it gets to about 85 units. At 85%, that's when they start having problems. So they need a float where cushions work, and it's usually 10 to 15%. But once it gets over that, it makes it very challenging for the sheriff's department. And it's also safety risk for anybody to be working in a facility like that when it's between 85 and 100% full. What we did is we took the study that had been done in 2012 and looked at the projected bed counts at that. And then we took our systemic analysis and the information that we gained throughout the study, and we applied those numbers proportionately. And what you'll see is actually what our suggestion and recommendation in comparison to bed counts and what you have here as a result of this study would actually reduce the bed count from 873 inmate beds to 696, which is a pretty substantial number. Potter County actually has a higher rate than median and next one of offenders due to, and this is a little summary that we put together here for you. Your crime lab case delays, your lack of repeat offenders, the bond rates, higher mental medical population. There's few alternatives to divert this population from the jail. The transients, the mental health status is unknown, so frequent higher classification levels, a high level of repeat offenders, and the mental health patients having to stay too long. We found that out from interviewing the mental health staff that there's several agencies where there's some people who come to jail who really don't belong in jail. But some of the other agencies out there don't necessarily either have room, nor do they necessarily want to take them, or they'll put off taking them for an inordinate amount of time. And if they just refuse or they don't, and if the person who's handling mental health issues and conditions in the jail and processing people, making recommendations that they be moved on or placed outside of the jail, doesn't have the authority to make those people take those. Those particular individuals who need more mental health than they really need to be in the jail, they need more treatment, more advanced, serious level treatment. That's something that we look at, maybe certain people in leadership that actually sit down and have a talk with some of these agencies, get some sort of higher level cooperative agreement that can actually help and take some of the pressures off some of the people who have to try and do this, but their hands are tied, they can't do it as efficiently because they don't have the authority or the level to make some of those decisions. So results of the study on how this can actually impact the current master plan for the projections. We found that you can actually build your detention facility with 177 less beds, which turns out to be about 63,000 square feet less footage. This will still meet your needs until approximately 2030. The county could then at that time, or any time between now and then, if it felt that was changing, we could add additional housing units. We're pretty good and accurate on these numbers. But right now, just initially, just from the savings in less beds and square footage, you'll save right around $1 billion just in the construction costs. That doesn't include the interest payments on bond. So that's a pretty substantial figure that result of the study. That's it.
So we're open to any questions you might have on what we presented today. That was a lot of information.
Yeah.
I want to digest any of the commissioners have any questions.
Well, I was glad to see that you addressed some of the reasons that Potter County is different than some of our neighboring counties. We've all heard over the last year or so that they can't understand why our populations are different and all that, but there's considerable difference between Potter County and others. And you outlined the reasons, and I like that. That's really appreciate that.
And I would inform the board that this study, and certainly correct me, Commissioner, if I state this incorrectly, this particular study really piggybacked off of the original feasibility and master plan study that was presented to the court. And so as an executive committee, we've been diving into those numbers and those dollar amounts, and what does that really look like? How realistic are those numbers? And so hence, this was an item that we did bring back to court for expenditure approval to really dive into these numbers, and this is the result of that. And so Larry, correct me if I'm wrong, but this will conclude all of the presentations and all of the studies that have been done through this process. The full court would have been made aware and privy to all of that information. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And from the court's perspective, kind of our next steps is we will meet as an executive committee or a committee again to evaluate next steps, but I know that we have had offline conversations in executive session about what's next for this particular topic for the court.
Good. Appreciate you being here this morning. Back to our regular schedule. We'll move to item number 2, vouchers, to consider and act upon the approval of payment of vouchers processed by the county auditor's office for the period of December 25th, 2013 through January 7th, 2014. The checks, check numbers 152992 through 153253, and wire transfers number 315 through 321 in the amount of $3,031,861.74. Have a motion to approve with second discussion. Second discussion.
I have a question for Carrie or Sheriff. Page number 15 of 39, check number 153152, Garza County Treasurer's Office, Inmate Pharmacy, $597.13. Just thought that was interesting for a pharmacy expenditure. Any clarification? Sheriff?
The inmate is
housed there, we are liable for the medical expenses with the medication. I know we had one that we had to pay for some insulin and stuff before, that was like less than 200. I'm not sure exactly what this was for.
They actually, someone up on one of our doors, so they
Okay.
until we can come in as well.
Okay, that makes sense. I just wasn't aware that, we had a contract with them, so I was thinking if we had to ship any off to another county, so that county caught my eye. Thank you. And then the second question I have is page 20 of 39, check number 153208, price overhead door repair, fire and rescue. Not sure if there was an accident there, Pat? I don't think you're here this
No,
morning.
ma'am, the door just, the door came off the hinges, or came off the tracks on it. And we had another, the second one was another door where we had some problems with it. We had the electricity go out in the valley, and we couldn't raise the door. So we had to go out and adjust it so that the doors were working properly.
Great. Thank you. That's all the questions I have for the clerk.
Any further questions? There being none, we've had a motion to approve and a second, all in favor? Passes 4-0. Item number 3, insurance report. Have anybody want to speak to that? So recognized. And item number 4, treasurer report.
It was an error. She forgot to take it off her device.
Okay. Forget about it. And item number 5, the tax purchase refunds, consider and act upon tax refunds for overpayment of taxes.
Just walked in.
Good morning.
Good afternoon. Did y'all have a nice morning?
Yes, sir, we did.
Comments on
We just don't have very many this year so far. And I don't know if it's gonna pick up by the end of January or not. The payments are babies to. That's it.
And on the refund, anything in particular?
I move we refund the overpayment of taxes for account number 65162006666.
motion to approve and a second, all in favor? Passes 4-0.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 6, quarterly budget comparison, recognize the first quarter comparison for year 2013 and year 2014.
So Carrie, I do have one question, and it's on page 4, on the expenditure side. General administrative, other expenditures is listed currently at $342,301, and last year at this time, we were at about $25,000. Is there something, I was trying to think of what could fall into that other than the emergency repairs, possibly at the sheriff's office.
These are mostly the insurance claims from our storm.
And thank you for pulling this information.
Further comment? So recognized. Item number 8, detention center inmate healthcare agreement with Northwest Texas Hospital Healthcare System to consider and act upon an amendment to the memorandum of understanding with Northwest Texas Hospital regarding the cost of inmate care.
And my apologies, I forgot to give a copy of the proposed agreement. But let me give you a brief history and I'll tell you how we proceed. We have a long-standing agreement with Northwest about indigent care in the jail. And what we do is periodically, our people and their people get together. We do a quarterly audit of the prisoners out there to determine what percentage of those people are indigent, what are not. And then we use that information to do an annual agreement that describes how we're going to divide the cost of medical care out there. And so we've done that again, and I got a memo of the new percentages. It doesn't vary very much, but I think, as I recall this year, the split for 2014 is going to be roughly 89% covered by the hospital and the remainder 11% covered by the county. So all I do is I just amend the existing agreement with those figures and get them to sign it and you guys to sign. So I can do that later, but there's nothing significant in the memorandum, which has been in place for at least 10 years, other than the percentages. And I think that's going a little bit lower for the hospital this year compared to what it was this past year. But I will bring that agreement back to you next time. Or I may wait till after I get it circulated to the hospital to get their signature. So basically the way it works is except for certain, there's an exception, we separately negotiate real expensive items, but essentially all medical care out at the jail, the hospital district pays for 89% of it, and we pay for the remainder of it.
Just passes that until our next meeting.
That'll be fine, so.
Item number 9, Santa Fe Railroad Museum, to hear a report on the status of the Railroad Museum and take any action necessary.
I'll at least explain the document that you have in your packet. So in your packet is a letter from the city of Amarillo when Mr. Wolfram addressed the court in reference to a partnership to the Santa Fe location that was recently purchased by the city. So I wanted the commissioners really as a whole to have the document that the city has provided that at this time they are not taking solicitations or any proposals for the newly acquired depot and real property. And so that's what you have in front of you today. I can certainly say that I am saddened by the news that the museum I've heard recently is has now dissolved. It's certainly not the intent of this court, and just asking for the expenditures on behalf of Potter County. So turn it over to Carrie and Dave.
We are still actively working on the audit, working on getting some third-party confirmations, but today we have not run across anything that has caused concern. We are still in the process, and I do want to make sure you all know that we are only looking at the financial end of it. We have not done anything with the actual data.
Okay. Carrie, is there, in terms of timeline, is this appropriate to put on the next Commissioners Court agenda?
Probably so, yes.
And then Dave, taking into light the recent news regarding the museum, how does that fall for the contract with the county on those particular artifacts? I know we were referenced in particular articles.
I don't know. I'll have to
Okay,
look
so
at the agreement, and in fact, I have not, in fact, unless, as far as I'm aware, the county has not received official confirmation. I understand that's happened, but we haven't received any confirmation that that's been solved. So I think there's a language in the agreement that sets out what happens, and I'm sure we just get the things back. It's not an elaborate process, but there is a process to cancel that contract.
Okay, thank you.
At this time, no action on that for item 9. Item 10, equipment purchase, to consider an act upon purchasing the forensic light source system from SPEX Forensics in the amount of $11,250 to be purchased with grant funds. David?
Yes, this is a forensic light source for the Sheriff's Office to help with investigations that are relying on their JAG grant fund. And because of the county policy of expenditures over $5,000, I have to bring it for approval. It is a sole source. This is the only company that could make it, and all our vendors we went to pointed us back directly to them. So as far as what it does, I may have to rely on the sheriff.
Your light at the end of the tunnel with this thing?
It just helps with our investigation, DNA, rape cases, those kind of things. Pulling up evidence that's not seen by the human eye, just magnifies it, clarifies it.
Sheriff, is this replacing something that you have in existence today, or is this a new initiative?
We've asked for this for the last 5 years, And it's just something that was able, we were able to give it to our
Over
JAG.
I make a motion that we accept the recommendation to purchase a forensic light.
Have a motion to approve in a second, all in favor? Passes 4-0. Item 11 is a copier contract extension. Consider and act upon the extending the current copier lease contract with Tascosa Office Machine per interlocal agreement with the city of Amarillo and the terms and conditions of the city's copier contract for the period of April 25th, 2015 through April 25th, 2020.
I'm bringing this before you today because we do still have a year left on our current lease contract with Tascosa Office Machines for our copier leases. But we do have some departments that need some new machines that are wanting to add functionality. And because there's only a year left on our lease, the price to do that is greatly, it's a lot higher than if we had a 5-year agreement, because it kind of works like the uniforms. Tascosa recoups their cost over whatever years are left on that lease for a new machine. And so what the city does with their contract, every year they extend it for 5 more years so that they always get that lowest pricing when adding new machines or replacing machines or anything like that. So there is some cost efficiency to doing that, because if you need a new machine, you're gonna get a lower cost over those 5 years instead of paying all the costs for 1 year and then possibly going to a new vendor at the end of that. So I thought it would be a wise decision to model the city's contract, since we are buying off the city's contract. It doesn't change our rates, it doesn't change what we're paying. If the department currently has a copier, it's not gonna increase their cost at all. It's just for those new services added. Also, a part of that, next year in 2015, because it was the end of our 5-year lease, Tascosa will actually come in and do evaluation of our entire fleet, because we've had those copiers for 5 years. And they'll help make a determination if departments need a new copier, and that's based on their processes, because it costs them more to maintain them, so they may want a new machine in there depending on volume. But that analysis will be done in 2015, because that was the end of our first year, or our first 5-year contract. So, my recommendation would be to go ahead and extend it for another 5 years, just like the city does, and go forward that direction.
David, I do have a follow-up question that you referenced in terms of new functionality. What will be the current process to make sure that there are some checks and balances on some of the expenditures if there is new functionality? I remember some time ago, probably several years ago, the discussion of color copies and color printers. And while there's certainly a need for that, at that time, that committee was trying to establish what those appropriate checks and balances were so that we didn't have these out-of-line expenditures that we weren't expecting.
Yes, I still have directed Tascosa that we won't be putting color in unless the department brought that need to the commissioner's court. So I think that, as far as color being more expensive per copy, that would be the case. When Kelly comes in and looks at putting a new copier after a 5-year lease, he looks at their current budget and gives that department head options to stay within the budget that they're already at. So that's an effort by our department and Tascosa to lay out 2 or 3 options of maybe even getting a reconditioned machine that's a little newer that can do more for the same price. So that's something we actively try to keep it at that same budgetary level.
That makes sense. Thank you for that. And so can you speak to any of the new functionality?
Well, there really isn't any new. I mean, the new functionality would be a department that didn't have maybe scan to PDF functions, maybe getting a scan to PDF function, maybe getting a stapler attachment so they could do staples on their copies or something like that. There really is no revolutionary new technology or anything.
Questions? I will make a motion to approve the copier contract extension for the years 2015 through April 25th, 2015 through April 25th, 2020.
Second?
The motion approved and second, all in favor? Passes 4-0.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Item number 12, formal bid, renewal, consider act upon renewing the following contracts. A, formal bid 1047-11 plumbing services with Allen's Tri-State Mechanical for the period of 2/1/14 through 1/31/15. There is no increase in those rates. And I think we'll take the second one also. B, formal bid number 104811- HVAC services with Allen Tri-State Mechanical for the period of 2/1/2014 through 1/31/2015. Again, no increase in rates.
This will be the third year of our 3-year contract, and I spoke to Mike and at Dempsey at the jail, and both of them were in agreement that they've been performing adequately and recommended to go ahead and do it. There are no increase in the rates from last year to this year, so it seems like a pretty no-brainer to move forward. And I did put the dollar amounts down here. The reason the plumbing contract, we spent so much more is the emergency work going on at the jail right now. That's part of that plumbing contract, the rates we paid.
I'll make a motion that we approve both bids. A motion to approve and second, all in favor? Passes 4-0.
Thank you.
Item 15, item 13, elections, consider and approve election judges, clerks, and hours of operation for early voting for the March 4th joint primary election.
Good morning. You guys have the piece of paper in front of you. We will have 5 early voting locations, and that is per the Texas Election Code. The Santa Fe building will be open a lot, especially the second week will be open 7 to 7 every day. But we also will have an early voting location in every precinct. So precinct 1 will have the Medical Center League House, which is out there, if you're not familiar, out there by the hospitals.
Yeah, why was that selected?
First of all, it was hard to find new locations. That we wanted the A&M Extension Office, and we just could not get them to get back with us. But we need a good place in precinct 1, and we thought we could catch a lot of that part of town. And if you look at it geographically, we pretty well spotted
I think the problem there is a lot of people don't know about that center.
Right, so we're going to be doing a lot of education on this. Then we have the Extension Office, Pleasant Valley, and then our 6th Street location that we have. We are doing a mailing because through this election, we had to move several of our regular election day locations as well. And so we're going to do a mailing to anyone who has voted in the last 2 years whose voting location is moved. And so we pared it down. We assume the fact that you haven't voted in the last 2 years, you probably don't have where to vote. And we're doing that. We're going to be doing some cards that will go in the jury rooms, and we have some other plans with the media in order to publicize some of these locations.
Melinda, I have a question on the branch early voting locations, and so it appears that you have some standard hours, some consistent hours. Is this the first time that has happened? I remember there being maybe 2 hours here, 2 hours there.
Yes.
I mean, you had to know the schedule.
You had to know the schedule. And for the voter, that's
Difficult.
That is difficult. And so we decided to establish regular hours at every place so that they don't have as much to remember. Places to be at. So
I certainly think that's something to highlight because you did have to know the schedule for my early voting location. So what I think happens is that people come to the Santa Fe location because they know those are consistent. So if you have consistent hours throughout the precinct, hopefully that will take some of the traffic.
It is, and that's true. The thing we don't want to do though is have every branch open as much as the Santa Fe building because this is an expense that we have to cover. We don't have, the parties don't help us with it. So we want to be smart about it as well. But these names and locations and everything are, any questions?
Any
I
questions?
move that we approve the election judges, clerks, and hours of operation for early voting.
A motion to approve and a second, all in favor? Passes 4-0.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And I will say, as a side note, Melinda's taken a proactive initiative to try to educate our Spanish-speaking population of the county. And so she's expressed some interest to work with some of the publications and the news station, so that's happening sidebar to that. So I certainly appreciate that initiative.
Moving right along, item 14, employment items. To consider an action upon the following employment items from Human Resources. The employment of Veronica Vargas, payroll coordinator, effective 12/9/2013. Is she in the court this morning?
She is not. I brought her the first, her first day.
Okay.
And introduced her.
I make a motion that we accept the employment of Veronica Vargas, payroll coordinator.
Second.
Motion approved and second, all in favor? Passes 4-0. And Michael, projects, Potter County projects.
I have quite a bit to report today. The packet that I've given y'all, the county courthouse, Texas Historic Commission projects, item number 1, we're just waiting on the shipment of the area roads to come in. We received a partial last Thursday. Item number 2, we're still waiting to hear from the Texas Historic Commission on January the 23rd if they will give us the additional supplemental funding. At that time, if it does happen, then I will have a new funding agreement that we will need the county judge to sign. Item number 3, county court of law handrail project. We're waiting on some different options from a local vendor. The county courthouse phase 3 preservation project, I've given you a copy of the pending warranty claims that Dave Kemp, I believe, has visited with Journeyman about. I do not know the status of where we stand in that issue.
I have not heard nothing in response to them, so my next, I want to send them a copy, make sure they understand what pending warranty items are. It'd be helpful for me too. Can you give us an idea about, what total dollars?
If I had to put a dollar value, I'd probably estimate anywhere from $44,000 to $48,000.
That's kind of what I thought. Okay.
As well as the signatures that we're
still waiting on that
Are not
substantial
answered.
completion. We've not received the date on that item either. Out of these warranty claims, out of the 13, there are 10 of them that I'm pretty sure that Journeyman is probably in a lawsuit with the subcontractors. So that's probably why they're not, anybody moving on these issues, or why they will not speak with them.
And Dave, my notes show that we sent a demand letter September 30th requesting actions and next steps, that we were gonna have something the first week of January. So hopefully we'll have something soon.
They had until January the 2nd, depending on on the day they received their letter, which I show they received 23rd December. So they had until January 2nd to respond to us. What we indicated to them was if they did not respond, by that time, we would assume that they're waiving their obligation to go to mediation. So we can do, so I expect to be talking about executive session next week, what our options are.
Okay. Thank you.
The third item is the Santa Fe elevator project. I briefly mentioned this to you here a while back. Currently over there, our elevator car number 2, we've had some issues with this. Kind of set the stage for this. Back when we acquired the Santa Fe building back in '94, we went through and performed a full assessment on all the elevator equipment. The equipment that was not replaced at that time was found to be in suitable operating condition. It lasted 13 years. What we have is beneath the elevator car there, we have up in the upper deck of the elevator room, there's a basket bearing and a shield right there that helps control this elevator up and down. It takes a lot of the weight off the elevator. So we have visited with the current contractor, and we have a probable cost of around $50,000 to come in and to repair or to replace this bearing. It's not worth repairing. That was a 1930 bearing. It's just a thing of the past. So what I'd like to present to the Commissioners Court today for approval is to acquire the professional services through David's office for North American Elevator Consulting Company, Mr. Rick Rawlett. We have utilized this company on basically all of our modifications on the courthouse project. What we'll need to do, of course, is seek a cost from this company for their services and bring it back to the Commissioners Court. The first task will be to get him involved to where we can have him on board with us to go through this repair, to make sure it's in the best option of what we're doing is our $50,000 spent wisely. Then we would proceed into phase two. Phase two definitely needs to be done before you get into your budget process this year. This is to bring in a consultant. We'll establish the guidelines for them for design and development and specifications to completely do a modification on all these 4 elevators. And to establish the bid specifications, then to present you with a probable budgetary cost that you can include in your upcoming budget.
Mike, can I ask a question there? So during this evaluation process, you'll be evaluating all 4 elevators at one time
Yes.
and not the one that
All
is in the
4 of them.
location?
We're looking at a complete modification like we did at the district court's building. We changed out all the equipment up top, all the cables, shivs, everything. Fire service recall will have to be changed out, that's a mandatory license. So it's all the elevators in that building.
Okay, and you think timing wise, now's the time to do that since you're reviewing one of them, or?
Well, we're bringing in I'm asking to bring in the consultant to review the $50,000 expenditure. We have concerns, is that in line with the scope of work of what needs to be done?
You think it should be, you would expect it a higher expenditure?
It came in higher, we talked to him, and actually come in lower, and speaking with the consultant frequently, he still feels it's high. So, just seeking his professional opinion, this gentleman's done this for a living.
Sure. Do we have any type of threshold in terms of a dollar amount for a consulting?
That's something they will have to visit.
I'll have to get basically a quote. He's not an architect or engineer, so I can ask a dollar amount and get that before we decide to award it to him, but until I got the course direction, I didn't want to move forward in doing that, so. We would definitely bring back the dollar cost it would be for him to review this 50,000, and then also we would go through the process to look at the rest of the elevators and aspects to do a modernization or modification.
I guess I'm just a little cautious that I don't want to spend $50,000 in consulting services in addition to the $50,000 repairs. So that's my only level of hesitancy through that. Okay, thank you for that.
Well, it'll be a phased project like we've used with the architects and engineers through the past. Task one would be the first initial step is to get him involved on their repair side. It may be to the point we don't even do the repair, but just wait till budget and put that actual portion of the project on hold.
Are you asking for official approval then to
I want to
proceed with that?
Yes, in order for us to talk to the consultant to bring it back at cost is what I'm seeking.
Do we need a formal motion for that?
Yeah. I think David's, yeah.
It's always nice.
A half a nod for you both. It's a full nod, a half a nod for you both. It's a full nod. Okay.
I move that we approve, looking into the hiring of a professional elevator consultant. Bring back the cost of that before final approval.
Second? Oh, Judge Ware is questioning, the agenda item is written to hear a report on various Potter County projects and not any action. Am I saying that correctly, Judge Ware? The agenda item indicates to hear a report and not to consider and act upon.
It does say to take any action necessary.
Okay.
So I think that's, I mean, and I agree, that's a very good point, Judge Weir. I really think that's a good point. I think under the circumstances though, since David's gonna bring, he's just going forward with the proposal that he's gonna bring back, and before we'll get to have final say on that for any expenditures made. So I think in light of that, I think we're okay.
Yes,
Appreciate you raising that point.
Since we're on that topic, I've had questions presented to me. This particular agenda item right here, all the one Judge Ware signs, and then mine is in conjunction with that, and on mine, I also have to address or take the necessary action required. Is that legal?
I think so. I mean, we'll be cautious. But I kind of look at it on a case-by-case basis, Mike. I mean, there's some things that we, like if you decided, if your recommendation is to go out and spend $50 million on a new building, I'd probably want a little more specificity than just that. But sometimes we approve it. So.
Very good, well, complete. We have a motion to approve, and a second for the consultant of the, looking at the elevator situation. All those in favor? All opposed, no opposed, 4-0.
Next item is the hail damage project reports. The first one is the emergency projects from the May 2013 hail damage. First item, the Santa Fe, item number 1A is actually complete on the tear-off. I received a phone call late Friday, and the roofing contractor had notified me that the company cannot make it in from Florida this week. They had some emergencies out there due to their freezing, so you can bump everything back 1 week on your schedule. And that'll kind of put us back in line. We still anticipate them to be here next week to actually pour the concrete on top of the building.